Welcome, everyone, to this week's reading session where we're continuing exploration into the mind of Mencius, but more importantly, the world that he lived in by venturing through the introduction of a interesting dialogue or multilogue that Quan has found. Quan, would you like to do like a quick, should we do a bit of a recap of some of the essential points from last reading to bring people to the present moment, or should we just jump right into it?
It would help me to, because I'm not familiar with him other than what I picked up with 5 minutes on Wikipedia.
Right. So, Quan, do you think you could?
Yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah, 5
Yeah,
minutes.
great.
Yeah. Okay, it's very simple. Mencius was a Chinese philosopher and strategist and advisor, having lived in the 4th century for the Common Era. Could be 370 to 289 BCE, or could be 380 to 300 BCE. But he was essentially a man of the 4th century BCE. He was a 4th generation spiritual disciple of Confucius. I say spiritual because he never met Confucius, and he even never met Confucius' grandson, Zhi, since he got Confucian teachings through the disciple of Zhi, the disciple of Confucius' grandson. So he was he had a quiet life, maybe till 50 years old or even 60 years old. And he decided at 60 years old that it was not enough to be a teacher, transmitting the Confucian corpus and ideal, and also, like Plato, a kind of program to prepare psychologically and morally future leaders. He wanted to go around the states of that time to persuade, to explain to rulers what would be an ideal government. Just a small historical reminder. The royal house of Zhou, Z-H-O-U, started to rule China from 146 BCE, and they truly ruled and unified China, if we can call China that polity. Let's say that we accept to use the word China a bit in advance. So he ruled more or less 1 to 1.5 million square kilometers directly for the first 3 centuries of that royal house, from 1046 BCE to 770 BCE. Okay, that's the first phase of that royal dynasty, called the Western Zhou. Why Western? Because their capital city was at the western border of China, of the China of that time. From 770 BCE to 453 BCE was the first phase of what we call the Eastern Zhou, okay, because of a military defeat, they moved their capital city to the east, so they are called the Eastern Zhou. And the first phase of the Eastern Zhou is called Spring and Autumn, from 770 BCE to 453 BCE. That period was a period of disunion. The royal house was not strong enough to maintain a centralized administration of the China of that time. So many principalities rose, and they were not of equal force, of course. At the beginning of the life of Confucius, at the end of the 6th century BCE, there were around 120 of those principalities. With time, the stronger principalities would absorb the smaller and the weaker principalities. At the death of Confucius, in 479 BCE, there were about 40 of those principalities. So the second phase of the Eastern Chao was from 453 BCE to 221 BCE. And that second phase is different from the first phase because the battles between the different principalities became extremely violent, okay? And the people involved in battles were numbered in hundred thousands of combatants. And what was interesting in the first phase was that the old aristocratic ethics of honor and of being gracious to the defeated has been erased completely during the second phase, called the warring states, precisely. Okay, so the last 2 centuries of the nominal rule of the Zhou royal house from 453 BCE to 221 BCE was the period of utter violence, where the old aristocratic morality was not capable to coach or to supervise the increasing violence. And during that time, you have many strategists and advisors who will try to give a tactical and technological advantage to the different principalities in order to gain territory and people. Of course, some of those advisors have more ambitions and try also to explain to their patron certain basis of a moral and philosophical government. But they were not all philosophers. They were mostly strategists and military advisors. So the Confucian school, or in Chinese, Ru Jia, the school of the scholars, distinguished itself by a certain pretension to teach the ruler certain philosophical and moral tenets in order to rule with benevolence. And everything came to an end 221 BCE with the foundation of the First Chinese Empire by principality called Qin. And from that Qin, we have China, of course, because the modern name in the West for China comes from the principality which succeeded to conquer the 6 remaining principalities and created the First Chinese Empire in 221 BCE. And that empire will know at least 8 to 10 major imperial dynasties and will end on February 12, 1912, when Empress Dowager Longyu of the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, signed the Act of Abdication, thus ending 21 centuries of imperial rule in China. Let's say that it's good enough as a summary.
Thank you.
I have one question, which you can feel free not to answer if you feel that the text is going to treat that. But you just said in your opening remarks that it all came to an end in 221 with the founding of the Qin dynasty.
Yes.
Is it too much to say what was it within the Qin dynasty's decision making that induced them to put the influence of the Confucian advisors to an end? Or is that not really something we can handle right now?
That's very interesting. I think that you're right to ask that question, because that's the irony of history, okay? The Qin dynasty succeeded to unify the last, to conquer the 6 principalities because of the advices of what we I would call, or any historian would call, the legalist school advisors. Okay, and the legalist school advisors, they are not humane at all, or let's say they were very efficient. They were reasonable people. I would be unfair to characterize them as barbarian, because they were not barbarian. They were efficient people, but they were not guided by the idea of the mandate of heaven. Okay, because in the idea of the mandate of heaven, there's the idea of kindness and benevolence, and that was enshrined in the code of conduct of the old nobility. And and once again, I remind that the Eastern Chow is in two phases: the spring and autumn from 770 BCE to 453 BCE. China was divided. The Chow kings were not capable to rule as they were ruling in the first 3 centuries of their dynasty, from 1046 BCE to 770 BCE. But they were still prestigious enough to impose a kind of code of conduct at war and in society. Okay, what I call the old gentleman code, which completely collapsed in the second phase from 453 BCE to 201 BCE, right? And the Qin dynasty was considered a little bit like barbarians by the rest of the other 6 principalities, because they were new inside the Chinese Confederation. And I would say that it's normal that they won, because they were not shy to put aside the old code of gentleman behavior, if you want. But by an irony of history, that dynasty who will make a big difference in China, because the form of government that they will introduce will last for the next 21 century, but they lasted only 15 years. And the next dynasty that would replace them, the Han dynasty, has been founded by a peasant, but advised by Confucian advisors. And I would not say that the Han would introduce at once the ideal Confucian government, but however, at the root, they were influenced by Confucian advisors, and they would introduce more humanity in the government. That's why the Chinese call themselves not the Qin, but the Chinese name that the Chinese use to call themselves is the Han people. Okay, so in remembrance of that dynasty ruling China for 4 centuries and being more influenced by the humane philosophy of the school of scholars, or as we say in the West, of the Confucianists.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, so let me do a share screen.
Can I just ask one quick question, Quan, before we start?
Yes, sure.
So we in the West call the country China based on the Qin dynasty from 200 BC. Who was it in the West who decided that that's what we would name it? We would name it China.
Oh, it's very simple, Jerry. The Westerner just imitated the Indians, because the Indians were the closest neighbors of the Chinese, of course, for centuries. So Qin in Sanskrit become China, okay, China. And when the Westerner came into contact with India, well, they learned from the Indian that the eastern neighbor of India is called China, so it became China in English.
Oh, okay. Now I get it.
Okay, So we are now at Mencius as a wandering persuader. And I guess like last time, we'll do probably cycles of 4 pages each reader. If your mic is of a low quality or something, feel free not to read. But otherwise, yeah, let's start a rotation process. Quan, who do you vote read first?
I would let you choose it, Matt.
All right.
Especially that we only have 4 pages for the introduction left.
Well, that's all we have
so
left.
The guy that, yeah, so that the person who will be chosen will read the rest of the introduction.
Okay. So volunteers?
I'll volunteer
All right.
because I don't think I got a chance last week to read, so I'll start this week.
Sounds fair.
Okay. All right. Mencius as a wandering persuader. During the Warring States era, competition for talented men by states contending for territorial dominance created a market for those who claimed to have critical knowledge. In Mencius's time, men traveled from court to court to advertise their special wisdom or skill, seeking a ruler who would make use of their services and provide them with a salaried position. Although there were examples of natives of one state traveling to another to seek court patronage earlier, Confucius is generally regarded as the initial example of this type of traveling shi. Beginning his journey just after 500, when he was forced to leave his native state of Lu. Convinced that he possessed the key to successful governance, the Tao, or way of the ancient sages, Confucius spent over a decade traveling from court to court, seeking to persuade rulers of the wisdom of his political program, hoping that one would elevate him to a ministerial position that would allow him to transform the governance of the state, and through that exemplary success, the governance of the world. In the century and a half after Confucius, the talent market boomed as she increasingly saw opportunities in learning and sought to equip themselves with an art that could attract a rich ruler or warlord's patronage. The nephew of King Quan of Qi, the king whom Mencius served as an advisor, is said to have had 1,000 shi in his employ, all specialists in some skill that appealed to their wealthy patron. Confucians during this period seem generally to have heeded cautionary warnings of the Analects and refrained from competing for court positions of political influence. As we read in 2a.1, Mencius regarded the issue differently, believing that conditions of social chaos had reached an extreme that created new opportunities for moral influence that did not exist in Confucius's time. Picking up the political mission that Confucius had abandoned at the end of his life, Mencius joined the ranks of shi who traveled from court to court offering their skills in practical administration and in war. These men came to be known as wandering persuaders, honored or rejected on the basis of the sales pitch or persuasion that they delivered to rulers willing to receive them. In 7a.9, we see Mencius specifically counsel another persuader who liked to wander in this way. Book 1 of the Mencius is mostly devoted to an episodic narrative of Mencius's persuasions to some of the most powerful rulers of his time. We can see in those persuasions many elements of Mencius's ethical philosophy, but his goal was not to persuade rulers that his theories were correct. He was trying to persuade them to act. While there was some overlap between masters who developed or transmitted traditions of thought to disciples and men who offered themselves for hire at courts, most of those with whom Mencius was competing for rulers' attention were the types of upwardly mobile she mentioned earlier. Experts in statecraft, diplomacy, military strategy, agricultural policy, and so forth. In the Mencius, several long passages illustrate how Mencius presented himself as an expert on some of these topics as well, offering accounts of what were probably even more detailed discourses on proper administrative structures and land distribution policies, always couched in the language of historical precedent. Examples would be 3a.3 and 5b.2. As a moralist seeking access to power, Mencius was in the difficult position of distinguishing himself from the self-interested careerists who filled the common ranks of persuaders. His solution was to make heavy demands on rulers before he would consent to the interviews that he was seeking. Arriving in a state, he would find initial lodging with a family of standing, and as news of the presence of this famous Confucian reached the court, Mencius would await messages from rulers and other power holders, declining to appear in audience or even to accept a welcoming gift until those overtures demonstrated respect and ritual observance commensurate with his standards. These demands that powerful men humble themselves before Mencius's moral authority delayed his access to courts, could get him into serious trouble. See 2b.2. But they clearly distinguished him from other persuaders. The rules that Mencius applied in such cases seem so ad hoc and inconsistent to others that few issues recur with more frequency in the Mencius than requests to explain his behavior in this regard. As we read the Mencius, there is a temptation to seek out portions that seem purely philosophical, separating them from contexts of practical persuasion, received wisdom, and self-justification, in order to fill out a fully articulated structure of theory. But it is truer to the text to read it not as a philosophical architecture to be detached from the decoration of biographical narrative, but as a portrait of an engaged philosopher whose ideas we see only adapted in pursuit of a social mission, and never in theoretical isolation outside the narrative. But it should be noted that while the translation here adopts this approach as a governing framework for interpretation, it has traditionally been more common to analyze the Mencius as the expression of a fully articulated theoretical structure, imperfectly and incompletely expressed, but self-consistent throughout. A perspective that continues to be common today and that has produced impressive scholarship. Such approaches will not accord with the more pragmatic view of the Mencius reflected in much of the commentary in this translation, which follows a strand of interpretive history that views Mencian ethics as essentially situational. Mencian thought as a situational ethics of virtue. While the Mencius introduces us to a variety of specific doctrines that were central to Mencius's thought, there is one theme of overriding importance, reflective of the text's roots in a practical mission that pervades the book so thoroughly that it may sometimes be overlooked. That theme is that ethics can never be reduced to rules. Ethics most fundamentally pertains to human dispositions and the ability to detect and act on them. Ethics is a matter of character, not rules. This is most directly expressed in what is sometimes called the doctrine of timeliness, which most simply holds that the correct action in any particular situation can only be assessed in context. Each context is a time, she, and to apply a good general rule at the wrong time is an ethical error. For all but a few who may be born sages, and all of these are mythical, long training in the behavioral norms of ritual designed by great exemplars of the past can cultivate a character that has both the firm moral compass and the nuanced sensitivity to situational context that are necessary to read prescripts for action out of the living world as it is encountered dynamically. This doctrine of timeliness is explicitly encountered only once in the Mencius, in 5b.1, where the master sage Confucius is compared to lesser sages, each of whom was known for a particular moral rule that was thematic to their lives. Confucius is unique because he alone has no rule. He simply acts ethically according to context. He is the sage of timeliness. Elsewhere, the same idea is captured through another metaphor, the doctrine of balancing. This notion is provided in passages such as 4a.17 and 6b.1, where the question concerns the degree to which ritual rules are to be followed, and the answer is that one must always find a balance between fidelity to rules and awareness of consequences. The balance is something that can be weighed only by the discretion of the actor, and only the person trained in the sagely arts can act as an unerring scale. These ideas illuminate the text's portrait of Mencius as a man whose apparently inconsistent and erratic actions seem consistently mysterious to even his closest followers and friends. When explaining his conduct, Mencius frequently invokes rules and application rules and conditions under which the application rules may not apply. It can make us think, this guy has an answer for everything, but it sounds like he's just making things up as he goes along. And that is probably the best way to think of these cases. It seems to be an axiom of the text that Mencius's judgment is unerring, a product of his trained character and the perfection of the forms in which he was trained. The rules that rationalize his conduct are implicit, derived from his behavior. His behavior is no longer governed by explicit rules because, like Confucius, he has transcended them. This form of ethical doctrine is an ethics of virtue, where rules are used to cultivate virtue, which in turn supersedes rules and acts according to an aesthetics of moral judgment. Those acts become the basis of new rules, which those aspiring to virtue can emulate until they are ready to supersede them in turn. Ethical choices can never be reduced to reason as the Mohists wish them to be. Every moral choice is a response to a situation unique in its particularity, and no rationally designed set of rules can ever exhaust the infinite conditions governing each context, or the infinite contexts a person encounters in the course of life. In this respect, Mencian ethics is representative of most Confucian ethics, and the polar opposite of the rationalistic utilitarianism of the Mohist school.
Hey, Quan.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay, Bob has a question.
Okay, go.
uh, Part of it, I heard ethics is a matter of character rather than rules. Was this a criticism of Mencius, or was it he that was saying that ethics is a matter of character? Because it seemed to be a criticism as I was interpreting the reading as it, but I could be wrong.
Well, I chose that translation by Professor Robert Eno because what has been read by Jerry during the 10 last minutes is probably the highest accolade a Westerner can give to Confucius or to the Confucian school. I would say that I am so happy when I read that because to see that a Westerner can understand Chinese philosophy to that extent is a deep joy for me. So it was the highest accolade, not only the 2 or 3 lines that you just mentioned, but everything that Jerry read in the last 10 minutes.
So, so does it reflect the views of Mencius, though?
It reflects what I would call a bit pompously the eternal wisdom of mankind as expressed in Asia 24 centuries ago. Meaning, let's not forget that the etymological meaning of virtue, okay, what Jerry read the last 2 paragraphs,
Okay.
is that when the heart is in the good direction and moving things with the heart in the good direction. And I would like to remind that the etymological meaning of virtues in Latin means the upright, manly strength. Okay, so everything that has been read by Jerry in the last 10 minutes means that the true sage, the true philosopher king, because he has the heart that is in the right direction, he's capable to give the answer that is appropriate to each situation and to each interlocutor, which is the absolute sign of the sage. Because the sage is not someone that has a theory or doctrine or recipes to offer. Okay, it's like the expression, if you have a hammer, you will see all problems like nails. on the contrary, the sage doesn't have a hammer, meaning a fixed theory, but rather is capable to be in contact with heaven, which is the Chinese name for God, and the supreme awareness that will guide him in his action in each specific situation. That is true intelligence.
So that tract was not a criticism of Mencius. It was just, it wasn't, where he said that with the rule-based thing. That's what I was trying to get at.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
would not have chosen this translation
Uh-huh.
if I thought that Robert Eno did not understand Asian philosophy.
Okay.
And I guess the Mohis school, my memory is a little fuzzy from last week when it was introduced summarily, but in the context of what was just raised here, the Mohis school, which is sort of also an opponent school to that of Mencius, is more formal based. It's more based on like fixed rules, as Eno is saying.
Compare him to Aristotle, okay?
Perfect.
Once again, I never thought that Aristotle was a bad person, but he was a limited person, okay? He thought that his limited understanding was the supreme, okay? And I would say that most of the bad things that happen on earth is not because of evil people, but of limited people. And the expression used in the paragraph, rationalistic utilitarianism of the Mohis school, I would say that it's exactly beyond Asian or European or Westerners. It's exactly the good expression to describe Mozi and to describe Aristotle, rationalistic utilitarianism.
Good. Any other thoughts or questions before we continue to the next section? All right. Jerry?
Okay, major doctrines. Mencius is famous for a number of specific doctrines. While his thought is much too rich to reduce to a few key words, I think it is useful in this brief introduction to highlight two that had a particularly strong influence on Chinese thought. His theory of human nature and his belief that the purpose of government was to reflect and serve the interests of the common people. Human nature is good. Mencius was probably most famous in his own era for his claim that humans were, by nature, morally good. Only a few decades after Mencius's death, the last of the great pre-Qin Confucians, Shunzi, made Mencius a chief target by challenging him with the counterclaim that human nature is bad. Mencius's arguments about human nature are laid out in most detail in Book 6a. But by far his most interesting demonstration of his claim is a thought experiment offered in 2a.6, exploring what experience and imagination can tell us about the universality of human responses. Taking as his example instant reactions to sudden exposure to a scene of imminent danger affecting a person we observe rather than ourselves. Mohis had pioneered the method of argument through detailed thought experiment, and in this case, Mencius uses these Mohis tactics to argue for an ethical ground in human dispositions, as opposed to ethical rules. Having provided evidence in this way for the universality of one particular type of spontaneously effective human response, Mencius goes on to claim identical universality for others, and to argue that these responses are the defining features of our natures as humans, while other responses, such as our appetites for food and sex, are not. Political populism. Like virtually every thinker in early China.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. So did I get this right? There were, after Mencius died, other Confucians who were trying to assert that Mencius was wrong about human nature, and Confucians were saying that human nature was ultimately bad?
Well, you have a major stream in the Confucian school which affirms that human nature is good. You have a small stream represented mostly by the famous Sun Tzu, Xunzi, just after human nature is good, which affirm the contrary. Okay, but I think that first it's a small stream, and that guy should have been cataloged with the legalists and not with the Confucians first. The second thing, and it's the historical information, that Sun Tzu was the teacher of a guy named Li Su. Li is his surname, Li, and Su, Si, was his given name. And that Li Su was the prime minister of the first emperor.
Okay. Right, Jerry.
Okay. Political populism. Like virtually every thinker in early China, as in later imperial China, Mencius believed that there should and would be kings. But Mencius articulated rationales for kingship and the process of royal ascension that had great influence. Mencius held that kings only enjoyed mandates to rule to the extent that they governed to the benefit of those whom they ruled. He insisted that the population was the most important component of the state, not the king. 7b.14. And that rulers who abandoned this charge were, in effect, no longer rulers. Of the murder of the tyrannical last king of the Shang, he denied that any act of regicide was involved, saying that an outcast had been executed, not a ruler. 1b.8. Mencius was an advocate for public welfare as a state concern, noting that it was unrealistic to expect people to behave in an ethical and lawful manner if they lacked the means to survive, except through selfishness or theft. For example, 1a.7. And he accused rulers who punished small transgressions while failing to fulfill their own responsibilities as entrapping their people. 1b.2 and 3a.3. Mencius's populism was extended to his notion of divine force behind history. In a long discussion of the way that the supreme heavenly deity, Tian, guides succession to the throne of the unified empire, Mencius claimed that Tian worked through the action of the people, and in this way, the will of the people has divine status in Mencius. 5.8.5. Because the notion of active democracy was not alive in any form in early China, Mencius's populism cashes out as a theoretical right to revolution, or, given the concentration of military power in aristocratic hands, a license for disaffected patricians to mobilize armies of dissatisfied commoners to test whether the will of Tian and of the people would pass the throne to them through war. But even in this form, Mencius expected the doctrine to have cautionary impact on hereditary rulers, steering them towards policies better aligned with the political Tao that Confucians advocated, ones that would attract mass support, and that was, after all, Mencius's mission. Beyond these two themes, the Mencius conveys an abundance of powerful and influential ideas on such topics as the guiding force of Tian and its relation to destiny and the limits of human agency, the dynamic of individual will and its relation both to our bodies and to our thought and feelings, and the social nature of persons and its reflection in structures of human society. And throughout the text, Mencius provides us with sensitive and highly nuanced insights into the motives and interactions of individual people. Mencius's greatness was clearly something more than intellectual. While the man we see in the text can be egotistical, abrasive, and severe in his judgments, we also see frequent evidence of thoughtful empathy and an ability to understand the complex motives and constraints on other people, which add authenticity to the message that our goal must not be merely to hold right views, but is to become fully humane people.
Okay, so are there any thoughts or questions before we plunge into the body of the text?
Just a small detail, but I want to be. There was a bad transcription of Pinyin at the beginning, just after Mencius as a wandering persuader. There was a Pinyin for 4 characters. Okay, let's count it. First, second, third. Okay, the third paragraph and the 8th line. Okay, these men came to be known as wandering persuaders, in Chinese, 有说之士. Okay, so in the transcription of the Pinyin, Youshui is not an I, is an O. Okay, that's a small detail, but in case I don't want people to be induced in error. Okay, it's at page, oh, I should have used the page. That's page 12. Page 12, third paragraph, 8th line. So it's an O and not an I. That's all.
I was really struck so far in the introduction by the similarities to Socrates and Plato, obviously, on so many levels, but the fact that there's such anomalies where all of the sophists in ancient Athens who sought employment and money to persuade and teach the art of persuasion to the elite.
Exactly.
They all relied on flattery, on fluffing up the egos of those who were paying them, which it seems like many of the persuaders here were doing because they needed to eat food and get paid, so they had to do their best to be liked. Whereas Plato and Socrates really didn't care about being liked. They just cared about the truth, which pissed off a lot of people and made them a lot of enemies. But it was an anomaly that made also a lot of people with substance want to follow them and pay more attention, which seems like that's what Mencius was creating in the minds of people too, who were wondering, like, why are you expecting these leaders to bow to you and respect philosophy when you need them? Don't you? It's great.
Exactly. And I'm absolutely delighted that you made the rapprochement, because it's exactly that. Okay, so those flatterers, they had some technical qualities that they can sell, of course, and the leaders and the princes were not idiots. They saw that they had something to sell. But with Confucius and Mencius, like with Plato and Socrates, the thing that those people had to sell was of a very high value, and they knew how to make the rulers understand that the diamond they have to offer is not a small technical skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and this idea of the divine consent of the governed, that the idea of Tian that Mencius developed as well, is great, because it really put a lot of weight on the soul of the leader, right? If all of a sudden the consent of the governed, or the goodness and well-being of the people, and their free will has a role to play in your right to lead, which can also cause you as a leader to lose your right to lead and give the people the right to even overthrow you. I didn't know that it was so explicit in his thinking.
Oh yes, I would like to remember to remind the metaphor. Okay, the metaphor used explicitly by Mencius is that the ruler is like a boat, and the people is like the water, either on a river, or the water of a river, or water of the ocean. So the water has the power to capsize the boat if the boat is not appropriate.
Hmm.
And what I wanted to say is that as Plato wanted to offer an education program, okay, education, educare, to bring forth what is within, the Confucian school also offer a program to educate in the etymological meaning of educate, educare, offer to the rulers first, of course, because of their importance in society. And I would say that a little bit like the bad experience that Plato had with the young Dennis of Syracuse. The true Confucian's master had that kind of bad experiences too, because most of the rulers were expecting practical advices and strategies, and not to elevate their souls. But those who were patient enough understood that they were reaching to a higher reality through that education program.
Jerry, I saw you had a thought or a question.
No, it was just when you were talking about the similarities between Plato and Socrates and Confucius and Mencius. After last week's reading, I was doing some research on that, but it's Socrates lived during the time of the Peloponnesian War. It was not a peaceful time. It was the middle of a war, and it seems Mencius lived during the warring states era. So again, it wasn't a peaceful time to be alive. It was war, and it's similar that you have this kind of warring state era in the Peloponnesian War, sort of like a crisis that they're trying to lead, their culture, their country out of. Very similar.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it seemed to me that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And let's not forget that Plato wrote his dialogue not because he was an aristocrat needing a hobby to kill time. Okay, he wrote his dialogues as documents to be used in the education program for future rulers. Okay, it was very specific because, as once again, and he was trying to apply that program to Dennis the younger, and as all of you know, it did not end well. As for most Confucianist master, it did not end well. And I would say that they had their revenge with the foundation of the Han Dynasty. Okay, and I think that it's not completely a coincidence that Liu Ban, the founder of the Han Dynasty, was of peasant extraction. Okay, because let's not forget that those aristocrats, whom ancestors sometimes goes back centuries, were not easy people to deal with. Okay, and maybe a new dynasty founded by a peasant was more open to the more humane teaching of the Confucian.
It's I think was Dionysius, as a side note before I jump in, I know we have to actually get to the text, but was Dionysius the first or second? It was of Syracuse, right? That they were leading in Italy.
Yeah, exactly. The
So
second.
that's a similar Italy irony as well, right? Like it was in Italy that you had the flourishing of the Golden Renaissance that finally activated in a more full way Plato's ideas and ideals and teachings, even though the earlier Italian leaders who he was trying to organize totally didn't like measure up. And sort of like what you said about the Han Dynasty, I was just thinking finally being the revenge
of the Confucian school.
Yeah.
Truth always prevail. It takes time.
Yeah, I like that. All right, so we've got book one. How do we want to organize the reading, Quan? I don't know if this is like a Platonic dialogue or how should we have voices?
Most of the time, there's only two persons speaking: Mencius himself and the prince to whom he speaks. Okay, in the first part is King Hui, meaning of Liang, or Wei, which is a kingdom around what is called Kaifeng nowadays. So most of the time, I suggest three readers: one impersonating Mencius, the other one impersonating the king, and a third one reading the notes on the right side.
Okay. I'll be one of the voices. Chad, are you comfortable reading along?
Sure.
Okay. Do you want to read the notes, or you want to be the king?
Okay. I don't see the parts. I just see.
I don't see the parts either. I'm assuming that'll be more evident.
Okay.
Now, if you see book one, King Hui of Liang, you have a small introduction, and if you go to the next page, you see the parts.
Okay. So I'll read the notes on the side, and I'll read the notes on the side, and you can be the king. Who's going to be Mencius?
Is Mencius what would start off here?
Well, you have a general introduction of one page, and the dialogue itself begins at page 18.
Okay, so we need a Mencius.
Yes, Matt, you can read the general introduction at page 17.
Okay, I'll read the introduction.
A good idea. Yeah.
And then somebody has to vote to be, or to choose to be in Mencius.
Okay, whatever. But I'm not sure where Mencius's part comes in.
You'll see. And we'll have a narrator, I guess, because there's a narrator saying like Mencius appeared in the audience before King Hui. Quan, you want to do that?
Yeah, okay. I'm willing to be the narrator.
All right. The voice of God. All right. The biographical elements of the Mencius. And there are more of these, Han, in any other early Chinese text. I'm sorry. I'm reading this so badly. Let me get into the mode here. The biographical elements of the Mencius, and there are more of these than in any other early Chinese text, are entirely related to Mencius's career as a wandering persuader, a thinker who traveled from court to court seeking a ruler who would employ his political and ethical ideas and give Mencius some position of authority to implement them. Book 1, both parts A and B, is generally taken to be a chronologically arranged set of snapshots of this endeavor. It is in this way more unified than any other book of the Mencius. The book opens with Mencius's first meeting with the long-ruling King Hui from 370 to 319 BCE of Liang, that is, the great state of Wei, whose capital was at Liang, who for much of his reign was the most powerful ruler of his day. The king was old when he met Mencius, about 325 BC, but he addresses Mencius as though he were older still, suggesting that at the start of his effort to travel in search of a ruler who would listen to his ideas, Mencius was already advanced in years. Mencius was a native of the small state of Zhou on the Shandong Peninsula, and although there are some legends about the young Mencius, we know next to nothing certain about his life before he began to travel from court to court, seeking a ruler who would appoint him to a high position and adopt the Confucian policies of humane governance that Mencius believed reflected ideal eras of the past. In the Analects, we see Confucius advise that when the way of these past eras does not prevail and the world is in chaos, the moral man bides his time in obscurity, waiting for signs of incipient order to signal that opportunities for moral progress exist. It may be that in the tumultuous era of the warring states, Mencius followed this principle until, late at life, he came to believe that the duration and extremity of warfare and treachery that surrounded him were themselves signs of moral opportunity, a notion that is explicit in passages such as 2a.1, 2b.13, and 7b.38. From that point, Mencius became a wandering persuader, one of the many men who traveled from court to court, seeking a ruler who would follow their advice and, they believed, thus restore order to the world by reviving the unified policy that had formerly constituted the empires of the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. Scholars disagree about when and where Mencius's life as a persuader began, but Book 1 seems to present its own unified picture of his career. After 1a.1 opens in Wei in the late 320s, all dates are BC. In 1a.6, we learn why Mencius left Wei after 319, shifting to the state of Shi. Is that right? Shi? Is that?
Qi, yes.
Shi.
Qi.
In northern Shandong, where 1a7 and 1b1 to 11 are set. The later passages are set in various states of southern Shandong. Is it Zhu or Chu or?
Zhou.
Zhou, way off. Okay. Zhou.
And when you have the ZHOU for the Zhou dynasty, imagine it's written CHOW, Zhou.
Okay. O-W, Chow. Okay. So Zhao, Teng, 1b13 to 15, and Lu, 1b16, where Mencius's career seems to end in disappointment, as it will in other forms at the close of books 2 and 7.
Yeah, I would like to make some comments on the map, okay? So you have the Shandong Peninsula, which is a province nowadays, okay? And to give you an idea of the areas, what is under the name Shandong is about 160,000 square kilometers. And the two major states of that area is Qi. And you see that on the Qi, you have Lu, which are smaller characters. Lu, if you remember, is the principality where Confucius was born in 551 BCE. Okay, and just under Lu, you have Zhou in even smaller characters because it's an even smaller principality, and it's where Mencius was born according to tradition in 370 BCE, or maybe 380 or 390 BCE according to modern research. And you have to the west the big state of Wei with the dot or the capital city of Liang.
So according to that, Confucius and Mencius were really close, it looks like, as where they were, the birthplace.
Geographically, but they were in 2 centuries apart in terms of chronology.
Yeah, geographically though, it looks pretty very amazingly close.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they must have had something really good in their drinking water. Sorry.
I'm sorry to give a very down to earth explanation, Matt, but that part of China has always been the richest part. So in general, if you have money, culture is more developed.
Yeah.
But then that didn't really apply to the Roman Empire in like Nero's world.
Yes, because well, problem is that I would say that in the following manner: the power and the riches of the Roman Empire created magnificent achievements of the human mind, but unhappily, most of the Romans were not capable to appreciate those things.
Gotcha. They killed their Ciceros.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Book 1, King Hui of Liang, Part A.
Okay, so Mencius appeared in audience before King Hui of Liang. The king said, okay, who is the king? Is Chad, I think so.
Okay. Aged sir, you have not regarded 1,000 li as too great a distance to travel here. Surely it must be that you have come to profit from my state?
A li is a unit of distance, about 1/3 of a mile. Is that how you want me to do it, or do you want me to wait till the end of the?
No, I think it's perfect like that because it's make it more alive.
All right.
Okay. Mencius reply,
Your Majesty, why must you speak of profit? Indeed, there is nothing but humanity and right. If your Majesty says, whereby may I profit my state, your grandees shall say, whereby may I profit my family? And your gentlemen and common people shall say, whereby may I profit myself? When those higher and lower compete with one another for profit, the state will be in danger. In a state of 10,000 war chariots, the man who assassinates the ruler will surely have a family estate of 1,000. In a state of 1,000 war chariots, the man who assassinates the ruler will surely have a family estate of 100. Such men have a 10th share of the state's force, and this is by no means a little. But if right is placed to the rear and profit to the fore, such men will never be satisfied unless they seize it all. Never has a man of humanity abandoned his parents, and never has a man of right put himself before his ruler. May your Majesty simply speak of humanity and right. Why must you speak of profit?
All right. The side notes there in regards to Ren signifies humanity, and right signifies yi, which are key terms in the Mencius. On the terms grandee, which is written as dafu, and gentleman as shi, see the glossary. Okay, I guess I shouldn't read those. Among the states of Mencius's day, size and strength were measured in terms of war chariots. Huh. So,
Mencius appeared in audience before King Hui of Liang. The king was standing by a pond in his parkland, gazing at the deer and wild geese around it.
Wait, can you guys read it? Because I just lost the screen share. It's saying your sharing is paused. Why is my sharing paused? There's no reason for this. New
Yeah.
share.
Wait.
Hold on, let me just figure this out here. Okay, we're back. Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Do worthy men also delight? Oh, is that my line?
No. It's the king. It's the king.
Oh, it's
This
the king.
channel.
Okay.
Okay, do worthy men also delight in things such as this? He asked.
Mencius
1.8.2
reply.
worthy
Oh.
men translates a key ethical term for the Mencius. I don't think I should be reading any of these sidebar notes, Quan. I think I'm disrupting the flow.
Okay. Or maybe at the end of each page you can read the sidebars. What do you think?
All right.
Okay. Okay, Mencius reply.
Only when one is worthy may one delight in them, though the unworthy may possess them. They cannot take delight in them. The poetry says, the king began his magic tower, planning it and spanning it. The people set themselves to work. In no time it was done. He started it with no great haste. The people simply came. The king was in his magic park. The deer and doe lay all around. The deer and doe all glistening sleek, the white birds gleaming bright. The king was at his magic pond, how full with leaping fish.
The king relied upon the labor of the people to build his tower and his pond, and the people took joyful delight in it. Hence, they called his tower the magic tower and his pond the magic pond, delighting in the deer and fish that were there.
I think that was still Mencius.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Well, it's done. Now, who is this line? The men of old shared.
it's still Mencius. It's till the end.
Oh, okay. So,
Ahead.
okay. The men of old shared their delight with the people. That is why they knew delight. But the oath of Tang says, when shall the sun die, that I may share death with you? The people then so wished the ruler's death. Though one may have towers, pools, birds, and beasts, how can you enjoy them alone?
Now you want me to read the side notes?
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Okay. So the Mencius frequently cites two well-known texts that Confucians regard as authoritative classics, the Book of Poetry and the Book of Documents, so familiar in Mencius's time that they are referred to simply as the Poetry and Documents. For information on these, see the glossary. The king in the poem is King Wen, a sage ruler of the, was it Zhao?
Chow. Imagine it as written CHOW. Chow.
Okay. Sorry. Zhao Royal House. For an overview of the historical and mythical background of Mencius's view of the past, see my introduction. And finally, the Oath of Tang is a chapter of the Book of Documents. The cited passage expresses the people's feelings about a wicked ruler, the last king of the Xia.
Yeah.
Quick question for Quan. When we go over that spelling and you have the ZH, which is generally Chow, as I understand, and the old spelling was just seemed more in line with English phonetics, like
Exactly.
Chow and Lai.
Yeah, exactly.
CH. Is there a reason why they changed that, or how? I mean, who changed it anyway?
Okay. In 1958, the People's Republic of China devised what is called the Pinyin transcription system. PINYN. Pinyin. It simply means transcription of sounds. And why they chose those character or those letters, it's because it corresponds more to the international alphabet. Okay. However, that international alphabet is not as easy for English speaker than the JYs, which is more natural for them. So when you learn Chinese with the new pinyin system starting in 1958, you have to learn equivalent. For example, the C is equivalent to TS, and as you said, the ZH is equivalent to the TCH, which is more natural for English speaker. But because everyone started to adopt the system by the people created by the People's Republic of China, because it would unify globally the way that the Chinese pronunciation is transcripted or transliterated. And before there was plenty of systems, and it became a tower of Babel.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, shall I pick up? Or you finished with the? Oh, okay.
Yes, and I have to say, King Hui of Liang said,
My attitude towards my state is simply to exhaust my every effort on its behalf. If in Hebei there is famine, I move people to Hedong and grain to Hebei, and likewise also if the case is reversed. When I examine governance in neighboring states, none is as conscientious as mine, yet the population of those states does not decrease, and that of mine does not increase. Why is this so? Mencius.
Okay, Your Majesty loves war. So let me use an analogy from war to explain. Picture the drums beating your soldiers into battle. The swords of the enemies have clashed. Suddenly, your men strip off their heavy armor and run, trailing their weapons behind them. Some run for 100 paces. Others stop after 50. If the men who had retreated only 50 paces began to laugh at those who had run 100, what would you think of them? That they were wrong to do so? They haven't run 100 paces, but they've still run away.
Mencius said,
if your Majesty understands this, then you need not look for the population of your state to grow over those of your neighbors. If a state does not interfere with the people during the growing season, there will be more grain than the people can eat. If you regulate fishing nets so that fine woven ones may not be used in the pools and ponds, there will be more fish than the people can eat. If you allow hatchets and axes to be used in the woods only in proper season, there will be more lumber than the people can use. Then there's more grain and fish and than people can eat, and more lumber than people can use. The people can nourish their living and mourn their dead without regrets. This is the root of the Tao of the true king. When on every 5 mu homestead a mulberry tree is planted, people 50 and over are able to wear silk clothes. When chicken, pigs, and dogs are bred in a timely way, all who are 70 and over have meat to eat. If labors in fields of 100 mu are not taken from their field work during the growing season, then families with many months to feed will never go hungry. When the education given in village schools is extended by the example of behavior that is filial to parents and deferential to elders, then none with white hair will carry heavy loads along the roads. There has never been a ruler who did not rule as true king. When those 70 and older wore silk and ate meat, and when the people were never hungry or cold.
By the
But
way,
now, when food is plentiful,
a mu is a measure of area under a fifth of an acre or the size of a large vegetable garden. And filiality, the dutiful conduct of children towards parents and deference to elders, which we all know.
All right. But now, when food is plentiful, dogs and pigs eat the people's food, and none know to garner and store it. When food is scarce, people starve by the roadside, and none know to open the storehouses and distribute it, or distribute grain. When men die, you say, it is not I, it is the weather's fault. How is this different from running them through with a spear and saying, it was not I, it is the spear's fault?
Oh,
Yeah. Once your majesty ceases to blame the weather, people will come to you from everywhere in the world.
the term the world, tianxia, may refer to all the known world or only to the area ruled by former kings of unified China.
Okay. King Hui of Liang said,
I am most eager to receive instructions from you.
Mencius replied,
Is there a difference between killing a man with a club or a sword?
the king said,
None.
Is there a difference between killing him with a sword or with bad government?
None.
Mencius said,
There are fat meats in your kitchens and fat horses in your stables, but the people are pale with hunger and corpses lie in the wastelands. This is to lead beasts and devour people. People detest it even when beasts eat beasts. To be the father and mother of the people, and yet in your governance to fall to leading beasts and devouring people, well, wherein then are you the father and mother of the people? Confucius said, may he who first fashioned figurines to be interred with the dead be without descendants. He said this because these forms were made in the image of people and so used. What would he have said for one who led people to starvation and death?
Okay, side note, the custom of burying figurines representing people who can act as servants in the afterlife is usually understood as a humane replacement for the prior practice by powerful members of society of burying actual people to perform that role. Here, however, the idea is that the figurines were an initial embodiment of a willingness to sacrifice life to improve one's death.
King Hui of Liang said,
As you know well, sir, there was no state so powerful as Jin. But now, during my reign, we have been defeated by Qi in the east. My son and heir was killed in that war. And in the west, Qin or Qin? Qin has taken over, has taken from us 700 square li of territory, while Chu has humbled us in the south. I am ashamed of this, and I wish to wash away this disgrace on behalf of those who have died. What should I do?
Mencius replied,
One may reign as a true king from a territory as small as 100 li square. If your majesty would only govern the people by means of policies according with humanity, being sparing in punishments, keeping taxes light, encouraging the people to plow deep and weed readily, then the young would have leisure to cultivate the virtues of filiality, deference towards elders, loyalty, and faithfulness. At home, they would serve their parents and elder brothers. Abroad, they would serve their elders and superiors. Such people could beat back the armor and swords of Qin and Chu, armed with nothing but pikes. Other rulers commandeer the labor of the summer field work so that people have no way to do their plowing and weeding. Their parents freeze and starve while brothers, wives, and children are forced to scatter. These rulers entrap their people till they sink and drown. If your majesty were to campaign against such rulers, what enemies could be your match? Thus, it is said that the man of humanity has no enemies. May your majesty never doubt it.
The term used for campaign, zheng, is cognate with the term for to set right, zheng, and signals righteous war against a tyrant. The term for enemy, what is that, D?
Like a T,
T, simultaneously means peer. Having no enemies means having none capable of being equal adversaries. The ruler who goes to war to punish tyranny will encounter no enemy able to withstand him.
Here I would like to make some comments on the map, okay? So here you recognize about 1.5 million square kilometers, which is about the size of what was ancient China 24 centuries ago, even if the map doesn't show all of the principalities, but I would say 75% of the land explored at the time is shown by map. You see, you can see the rectangle of the Huanghe, okay, the Yellow River, and from the sea to the left of the map, it's almost 1,000 kilometers, and the same for the Blue River or the Changjiang or the Long River, and you see Qin on the left, upper left, which is the principality that will unify China and will give her name China. And Chu, CHU, is the true rival of Qin, but it will come only later at the end of the warring state. And of course, you recognize Wei and Qi on the map. Okay.
And just quick, the distance of the rivers, you said, is about 1,000 miles or kilometers?
Kilometers on that map, okay?
On that
because
map, yeah.
Because the total length of the Yellow River or Huanghe is 5,500 kilometers, and the total length of the Yangtze or the Changjiang, the Long River, is 6,300 kilometers.
Yeah.
So ancient China is about 15 to 20% of present day China.
Mhm.
1A6 now.
Okay, Mencius appeared in audience before King Xiang of Liang. King Xiang is the son of King Hui. When he emerged, he said to others,
When I first caught sight of him, he did not have the look of a ruler of men. And when I approached closer, I saw nothing in him to inspire awe. He began by asking me abruptly, how can the world be put in good order? I replied by saying, is that me?
oh yeah, it's you.
Yes.
It's you.
No, I replied by saying, it will be put in order through unity. Who can unify? Okay, well, is that who can unify it? I think that's the king, right?
lesser king. Yeah.
Okay. The roles here are a little.
We don't have a speaker for the son of the king.
Okay, yeah, it's the son of the king. So, do we have a son of a king?
Well,
I'll
Chad,
play
you
the
can
son of
keep
the
on.
king.
Hey, where's
Chad can keep on.
where's Lou?
Who can unify it?
Okay.
Luke is
I
busy. He's still working at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, Luke. I said no one in the world would refuse to give it to him. Does your majesty know how rice plants grow? If there is a summer drought, the seedlings wither. But if clouds rise thick in the heavens and the rain pours down, the seedlings will suddenly swell upright. Who could stop them? Now in the world today, there are no leaders who do not take pleasure in killing people. If there was such a one, the people of the world would all straighten their necks to gaze towards him. Wait a minute, I lost my place.
If he were truly such a man.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If he were truly such a man, the people would come to him just as water flows downwards, pouring down with such force. Who could stop them?
Okay. Will you teach me about the great hegemons, Duke Quan of Qi and Duke Wen of Jin?
The disciples of Confucius did not speak of the affairs of these rulers, so later generations of followers had nothing to pass on. I have not learned of them. Failing in this, may I speak to you of true kingship? What sort of virtue must one have to have?
Oh, that's the king.
Is that the king? Okay.
Oh, okay. What sort of virtue must one have to rule as a true king?
Mencius said,
If one rules by protecting the people, none can stop him.
Could a man like me rule as a protector of the people?
Yes,
How do you know I could?
Mencius said,
I heard from your courtier, who that when your majesty was sitting up in the great hall, an ox was dragged by in the court below, and that seeing it, you asked, where are you taking that ox? Your courtiers told you that it was to be slaughtered and its blood used to anoint a newly cast bell, and you said, spare it. I can't bear to see it whimpering like an innocent man being taken to execution. And when your courtiers asked whether you wished them not to consecrate the bell, you said, how can we do away with that? Use a sheep instead. I wonder whether the story is accurate.
Yes, it is.
Well then, your heart is sufficient for you to reign as a true king. The people all thought you spared the ox because you were stingy, but I understand that it was because you could not bear its distress.
That's right. That's just what they said. But even though Qi is not a big state, how could I begrudge sacrificing a single ox? It was that I couldn't bear its whimpering like an innocent man being taken for execution. So I told them to substitute a sheep.
Your Majesty should not be surprised that the people took you to be stingy, since you substituted a smaller animal for a large one. How could they know? If your concern was that they were being executed despite their innocence, what difference would there be between an ox and a sheep?
the king laughed.
Really, what was I thinking? I wasn't thinking about the expense when I said to substitute a sheep. but it's natural that the people said I was just being stingy.
Mencius said,
There was no harm in what you did. It was the working of humanity. You had seen the ox, but you had not seen the sheep. For Chunzi, Chunzi, if he has seen a bird or beast alive, he cannot watch it die. If he has heard its voice, he cannot bear to eat its flesh. This is why the Chunzi keeps his distance from the kitchen.
That's funny. The term junzi, which denotes a type of ideal moral person, is a key ethical term for Mencius. Some translators render it with an English phrase such as nobleman, but it will be left in transcription here.
Yeah, I think that most of the time it's translated as gentleman.
Yeah, that doesn't really get across the meaning of the word, eh?
Well, yes and no. I would say that it's the perfect equivalent because, after all, in Renaissance Europe, gentleman meant a nobleman. Okay, and Junzi exactly means the son of a lord. So it also means a nobleman in the first meaning. Okay, the son of a lord. So I would advance to say that gentleman is the right English equivalent of Junzi, either on an hereditary basis or on an moral basis, because as in Europe, gentleman meaning a nobleman become a word to qualify more moral qualities, as Junzi was a marker of noble birth, became also a word used to describe moral standing.
I'll go with that.
Okay, so the king was pleased.
The poetry says, the heart lies within another, yet it is I who takes its measure.
How perfectly this describes you, sir. When I reflect on my actions, I could not grasp my own mind in this.
Oh, no, that's the opposite.
No.
Is that not me?
No, it's still the king.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was quoting two lines of poetry, and after he explains why he used those two lines.
Okay, so he's now the king is now talking to Mencius, huh?
Exactly.
How perfectly this describes you, sir. When I reflected on my actions, I could not grasp my own mind in this, but your words match perfectly with my feelings at the time. But now, tell me how such feelings accord with one who rules as a true king.
Mencius said,
if someone said to your majesty, I have strength enough to lift half a ton, but not to lift a feather, vision clear enough to observe the tip of a hair, but not a load of firewood, would you accept what he said?
No.
Well then, why would one accept that your majesty's kindness could extend even to the birds and beasts, but its works could not extend to the people? If one cannot lift a feather, it is because he won't use his strength. If one cannot see a cartload of firewood, it is because he won't use his sight. If the people have no protector, it is because you are not using your kindness. Hence, your majesty does not rule as a true king, only because you will not because you cannot.
King said,
how are you being unwilling and unable truly different? How are being unwilling and unable truly different?
When it comes to picking up Mount Tai and carrying it over the Northern Sea. If you tell someone, I can't do it, it is because you truly are not able. When it comes to helping an elderly man crack his joints, if you tell someone, I can't do it, it means you're unwilling to do it, not that you truly are unable. That your majesty does not rule as a true king is not a matter of carrying Mount Tai over the Northern Sea. It is like being unwilling to help an old man crack his joints. Treat your aged kin as the elderly should be treated, and then extend that to the treatment of the aged kinsmen of others. Treat your young kin as the young should be treated, and then extend it to the young children of others. If you do this, you will be able to govern the world as though you turned it in your palm. The poetry says, an exemplar in treating his wife and extending to his brothers, thus he ruled the family and the state.
Hold on. Just pause.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Got this. Okay. Let me get rid of this phone. All right.
So the poetry says?
Okay, the poetry says, an exemplar in treating his wife and extending to his brothers, thus he ruled the family and the state. What this is speaking of is taking one's own heart and applying it in the treatment of others. If you extend your kindness, it will be enough to protect all within the four seas of the world. If you don't extend your kindness, you can't even protect your wife and children. The reason that the ancients so far exceeded other men is none other than this. They excelled in extending what they did. Now, why is it that you are kind enough to, in your treatment of birds and beasts, but your works do not extend to the people? Only when you put a thing on a scale can you know how much it weighs. Only after you measure something can you know how long it is. It is so with all things, and the heart more than others. I urge your majesty to measure your heart in this.
Sorry, having trouble here.
In this way. Mencius,
Mencius continued.
But perhaps your majesty's heart is only content when you have mobilized your troops, imperiled your subjects, and incited the resentment of other lords.
Said the king.
No, said the king. How could this bring me contentment? It is just that I wish to attain my great desire.
May I hear what this desire may be?
The king smiled, but did not speak.
But did not speak. Mencius said,
is it that you lack rich foods that satisfy your palate, fine clothes that bring comfort to your body, colorful decor that can bring pleasure to your eyes, beautiful music to stimulate your ears, or court favorites to carry out your every order? Surely your royal officers could supply such wants. Surely these are not what you mean.
Said the king.
No, it is not because of such things.
In that case, I can guess your majesty's great desire. It is to broaden your territories, to have the rulers of Qin and Chu pay homage at your court, to stand at the center of the states, and subdue the barbarians beyond the borders in all directions. But to pursue these ambitions by the means you now employ is like trying to catch fish by climbing a tree.
The king said,
It is as bad as that?
Likely worse. Climbing a tree in search of fish, though you will find no fish, no disaster will follow. Using your methods to seek your ambitions, if you exhaust your heart's effort in the pursuit, disaster will surely follow.
May I hear more?
Mencius said,
If the state of Shao fought the state of Chu, whom does your majesty think would prevail?
The men of Chu would prevail.
Precisely so. And this is because the small is inherently no match for the large. The few are no match for the many, and the weak are no match for the strong. Within all the 4 quarters, there are only 9 regions of 1,000 square li each, and your state of Qi commands altogether only one of these. To subdue 8 by means of 1, how is this different from little Shao trying to be a match for Chu? Instead, you must re-examine the root of the matter. If your majesty were now to proclaim policies that were governed by humanity, you would cause all the warriors in the world to wish they could attend your majesty at court, all the tillers in the world to wish that they could till your majesty's lands, all the merchants in the world to wish they could collect at your majesty's markets, all the travelers of the world to wish they could journey on your majesty's roads, everyone in the world who feels distress because of their rulers would wish to come denounce them before your majesty. If this were so, who could stop them?
the king said,
I am slow-witted. I can't think through your strategy. I ask you, sir, to assist me in my goals and instruct me in plain terms. Though I am not quick, please make the attempt.
Mencius said,
Only a gentleman can maintain a constant heart without constant means. For the common people, if they have no constant means of support, they cannot sustain their hearts' resolve. Without the constant resolve of the heart, they will slip into the excesses and deviant behavior, stopping at nothing. Now, to allow them to fall into criminal ways in this manner, and only then to punish them, is to entrap the people. Whenever has there been a man of humanity in authority who sets traps for people? The enlightened ruler regulates the people means of support, ensuring that there was sufficient for them to serve their parents and nurture their wives and children. Through good years, they will always have enough to eat their fill. In bad years, they will at least escape starvation. Then, when he guides them towards goodness, the people will find it no burden to follow. But now, regulation of the people's means of support does not provide them goods sufficient to serve their parents or nurture their wives and children. They live through good years in the bitterness, and bad years they cannot escape starvation. In this way, they live in fear that nothing they can do will starve off death. where would they find the time to attend to matters of ritual and rite? If your majesty wishes to put these matters into practice, re-examine the root of the matter. When on every 5 mu plot of land, a mulberry tree is planted, those 50 and over are able to wear silk clothes. When chicken, pigs, and dogs are bred in a timely way, all who are 70 and older have meat to eat. If laborers in fields of 100 mu are not taken from their field work during growing season, then even families with 8 mouths to feed will never go hungry. When a ruler attends to the education given in the village schools and sees that it is extended by the example of behavior that is filial to parents and deferential to elders, then none with white hair will carry heavy loads along the roads. There has never been a ruler who did not rule as a true king when the aged wore silk and ate meat, and when the people were never hungry or cold.
I'll just read here the side. It says ritual li is one of the most important concepts for the Mencius and for all Confucian texts. Confucians were, as a group, professional experts in traditional ritual, and they viewed li as the key to self-perfection and transformation of the world. Although the English term ritual sometimes denotes a trivial thing, mere ritual, reading the Mencius requires that the force of ritual in ancient China be kept in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that Li Yi can have at least 2 translation: ritual in the ordinary sense of the word in English, and understanding of ultimate metaphysical principles. It's the deeper translation for ritual, or Li Yi.
Mm. Yeah, so it was a more complex word. It wasn't just the act of doing a ritual like we often use in English, but it in Chinese, it's more infused with also the essence of what's supposed to be happening metaphysically while the ritual is occurring, or something more to that extent.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I would say that if I can have an influence in the English speaking universities, I would suggest to replace rituals in the English translation by understanding of metaphysical principles.
Which we express by sacrificing things, right? On an altar. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Luke. Okay, I'm just mute in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Quan, do you have any thoughts you would weave into our minds or punctuate after we've just read this this little back and forth between the king and Mencius?
Yes. Well, first we at the end of part A of book 1, and I would say that it's the essential of the Mencius. Okay, meaning that once again, as I said, that Plato did not write his dialogues just for fun or to kill time, because he was an aristocrat and he didn't need to work to survive, but he wrote his dialogues as documents in the education for future rulers. So the Mencius can be perceived as the same. And let's not forget that those dialogues have been put in order by his disciples after his adventures with those princes and kings. So it's also with the idea that those documents will be used as textbooks for discussion and for the educational curriculum for future rulers. So here, and in this part A of book 1, everything that is in terms of ultimate metaphysical principles have been written down.
Wow, that's extraordinarily important. I've got a question on that note. I know in Plato's case, he had an academy for at least that endured for a very long time. And I know that his teachings were not simply isolated to the academy, but there was a physical place where people could go, his students and next generations could study the texts and do work on science and stuff. Was there any similar institute or building localized in space in Mencius's case, or was it more of a philosophical thought that sort of was more fluid?
Okay, there were two places. Okay, first, the home of Confucius in the Lu Principality. When Confucius died in 479 BCE, his disciple used his ancestral home as the physical place for the Confucian school. And the Principality of Lu will be destroyed in 249 BCE, 27 years before the foundation of the empire in 221 BCE. Okay, so there were no physical place between 249 BCE and the restoration of the Confucian teaching by the Han Dynasty at the beginning of their rule, meaning in 206 BCE. So there was a gap of about 50 years without no physical place in terms of the continuation of the ancestral home of Confucius as a place of teaching, okay? Or if I want to borrow the name academy from Plato, okay? The second place was the Jixia Academy, Jixei. It was a physical place near the western gate of the Qi Principality on the Shandong Peninsula, as we have seen on the map. That Jixia Academy has been founded at the end of the 4th century. And we can consider that Mencius was one of the founding scholars of the Jixia Academy, because in the last part of book 1 of the Mencius, he was speaking. Okay, so the three kings to whom he was speaking was first King Hui of Liang, second King Xiang of Liang, who was the son of King Hui of Liang. But at the end of that chapter, he was speaking to King Xuan of Qi. Okay, and Qi was precisely the principality on the Shandong Peninsula, being the host or the creator of the Jixia Academy. And that Jixia Academy would be destroyed when the Qi Principality would be destroyed in 221 BCE by the first emperor.
Interesting. Very interesting. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
And anybody just jump right in there if you got a question. How long after Mencius died was this work of his writings compiled by his disciples?
Oh, at his death.
At his death.
I would make a comparison, okay? If you take the Lun Yu by Confucius, the Analects, on the 20 chapters, you have chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 have been written down in the 10 years after Confucius' death, okay? Chapter 1, 2, 3 have been written almost at the end of the Principality of Lu, because it was a kind of introduction, okay? So the same for, but Mencius has been more lucky than Confucius. Most of the dialogue has been written down by his disciples in 5 years after his death. Because let's not forget that Confucius was not as prestigious than Mencius, even if in Chinese culture, Confucius is considered as the first Confucian sage, and Mencius the second Confucian sage. But in their lifetime, Mencius enjoyed a much greater prestige than Confucius, because he enjoyed the reputation of the Confucian school 2 centuries after the death of Confucius. And Confucius was the guy who started everything, if you want. So it's normal that during his lifetime, he did not enjoy as much prestige as his 4th generation disciple, Mencius.
Quan, if I understood correctly, you said the first emperor destroyed the academy.
Uh,
Is that correct?
yes, because he destroyed the principle. Because
Why? Yeah. Why is my question? Yeah. Was
we
motivation?
Well, it's very simple. The Jixia Academy was sponsored by the Principality of Qi, and the first emperor conquered the Principality of Qi in his process of unifying China. So he destroyed everything that his political components created in the past because he wanted to absorb the scholars of the Jixia Academy in his own empire.
You're good. Well, I'm just thinking, when like in Greece and then Alexander, at least, kind of when he conquered Athens and all, he gave some kind of recognition to it. He didn't destroy it, but it just was possible if it were maybe a different emperor that they might have fared better.
Well, the first emperor opened also an academy in his capital city, and he destroyed physical buildings because he wanted the scholar to go to his own academy in his capital city in the west of
because he
China.
wasn't like totally against the philosophy of Mencius.
Well, he understood those scholars as a kind of ornament for his empire, but I'm not sure he was ready to learn from them.
Okay.
I would like to give an example, okay? When the Greeks have been conquered by the Romans, many Greek philosophers and poets and playwrights have been enslaved, okay? But they were special slaves. They were treated much better than the average slaves, but the Roman conquerors were, how can I say it, were willing to use them as a kind of decoration of ornament for their to show off their riches, if you want, okay? But I'm not sure that they were truly willing to learn from the Greek philosophers who, after all, have been enslaved by them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the exhortation to walk the balance, right, where you don't like as Mencius is constantly reminding the king, this seems to be a theme of balance, that you don't want to promote decadence to the point that the people become corrupt, but at the same, so abundance in that sense could be seen as a corrupting influence if you have too much, far more than people could eat, and you're just producing way more than is necessary. But at the same time, you don't want to go the other extreme and just have them live on gruel and scarcity, such that the first little bit of bad weather they get mass starvation. But there's this like balance, which
Yes.
I don't know if you. Sorry, yeah, go on.
Matthew, I think that you touched there a theme that is one of my favorite themes, because I don't think that riches is a corrupting factor. On the contrary, you need to be rich to have a powerful culture. But what is corrupting is the absence of the heavenly understanding or the true deep understanding of metaphysical principles. I would say that the Romans, okay, maybe I would be a bit unfair in my characterization, but I try to explain my concept with a practical example. The Roman peasants had the virtue of their ancestors, because the Roman peasants, like the Chinese peasant, they had a very frugal kind of life. Okay, their virtue comes from a simple life, but they were not capable to be the conqueror of luxuries, if you want, because they did not develop a deep enough understanding of metaphysical principles, because they have been conquered by the Greeks in a certain way, because they were not prepared to enjoy the luxury of the mind and of the senses that the more refined Greek civilization brought to them. If those Roman peasants had a kind of deeper philosophical preparation before they conquered the Greeks, they would have been capable not to be corrupted by a more refined lifestyle.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. Yeah, because that's the ultimate paradox that a lot of people run into when they're like, well, you can't let too many people just have abundance, because then they'll just become lazy and corrupt. So you got to keep them working, which means you got to keep their bellies empty, so that they'll be productive. And no, these people just don't think about metaphysical like culture, like a real metaphysical culture that cultivates the love of higher passions, so that you could both enjoy the flesh, you could enjoy sensual experiences while at the same time not being owned by them, but being still led by something higher. Do you think Mencius is insensitive to that, or do you think he's does he deal with cultural uplifting and issues like that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Because as I said, that's first that part A of the book one of the Mencius. All those things has been discussed in details, and he repeat many times the same thing but with other words, because it's the core of all spiritual traditions that the soul has to be the master of the senses. There's nothing wrong to enjoy the senses, and the enjoyment of the senses will not lead to corruption if the soul present. Or to repeat the catchphrase that I like very much, the soul has to be present in order to be master of the senses.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I was just looking back at the first opening of book one, when he's talking to the first elderly king who's wondering what Mencius's role is going to be as far as profit to his state is concerned. So they immediately hit at the question of, what is your idea of profit? Is it
exactly
possessions of things? Is it money, or is there something higher than profit? And that's the first question that opens up the whole dialogue.
And I would like to make a link with Plato. Okay, plutocrats, rulers motivated by profit; democrat, lower democrat ruler motivated by social convention; true democrat ruler motivated by honor; aristocrat rulers motivated by knowledge and creativity; and the philosopher king ruler motivated by creating a truly virtuous society composed by virtuous man, which is the ultimate. Meaning a virtuous man being man capable to enjoy the pleasure of the senses, but will not be corrupted by the refinement of the sense, because the soul is present and the soul is the master of the senses.
Good. Very good.
And that's universal history. Okay, and that's universal history. If you look at the history of many nations, they would reach a top and they would be corrupted by refinement of the lifestyle, because the reason why, because they did not manage to create in their inner elite a strong enough soul.
Right. Any parting questions or thoughts before we round it off for tonight?
No, but that was very good. I enjoyed the presentation. I understand it a lot better, I think, now with the analogy with the West also falls into place. So anyway, thank you, Quan. And I'll see you guys probably in I got my dinner is ready here, so I got to get going. But I enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to next week.
Question: is there a way to download this document of Hutter and?
Oh, Chad, I didn't send it to you. Okay, Chad, I'm going to make sure I send it to you. And for anyone listening online, it will be available as a link to be downloaded from the Rising Tide Foundation website. I'll make a little link and people can click on it.
Thank you.
Great. All right, everyone. So this Sunday, we have Jeff Steinberg, who's going to present on Russian-U.S. relations deep into the past and into the future. That'll be Sunday, I think, at 4, but I'll send out an email like usual on Friday or Saturday with the Zoom link. Feel free to invite people. It's going to be a really good class, followed the week after by Jerry. So I hope to see you guys on Sunday.
Matt,
Right.
when you say followed by Jerry, you mean that both are presenting the same day?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was ambiguous. No, Jerry's going to be a standalone showpiece the following week.
Okay, I see. Okay. Okay, ciao.
Okay, bye.